Chapter 14, The Evil That Men Do. The Evil That Men Do. Valigar could feel his lips quirking into a smile, the girl next to him barely able to continue her story for laughter, voice wavering as she recounted her tale.
So, there I was in the guest dormitories, just slipping the note telling him where and when we could next meet under his pillow, when I see Fritha waving frantically to me from the common room at the other end of the hall. A pause, my heart rattling, and over it and the low murmur of the common room, I can hear their gruff philosophy sing on. I don't know who had the nicest beard. 3 old sages from the Brotherhood of Taloyan are back early from dinner and marching up the stairs about to catch me in their acolyte's dormitory. Ulrond had already said that I would be scribing until the following summer if I was caught fraternizing with our younger guests after that last lot of trouble, and I'm sure I'm for it, when Fritha dives for the chair next to her, thrusts this cushion up the front of those great smock dresses she used to wear and cries help. I'm having my baby. Oh gods! Those old men instantly descend upon her, along with half the common room, giving me ample chance to clear the hall and slip past them for the stairs as she's borne off to the nearest sofa only for her to have to shamefacedly pull this cushion from under her skirts. Oh, she was so embarrassed, she spent the next 10 days hiding in the kitchens until the Brotherhood had left.
Imoen spent a moment lost to pink-faced laughter, Valigar silent and smiling as she caught her breath. The sun was on his back, already a good way up on its eastern ascent, the air fresh and warm after the muggy heat of the previous day. The caravan had set out again with the dawn, the road still skirting the forest's edge, and their company were scattered in pairs along its length as their roles as guards required of them, Anomen, Brianna and their mounts selected to be outriders. Valigar could just see them, blots of grey and brown out on the plains further down the caravan. Next to him, Imoen sighed, dabbing her eyes on her sleeve.
Ah, Fritha, it'd kill me if she knew I was telling you this.
Valigar glanced far back, past Jahara and Minsk to where the girl herself was walking with Solafane a good dozen cart lengths behind, the drow passing her one of the 2 apples he had just produced from his bag. Valigar had joined their group far later than most of the others. He wondered vaguely if she was much changed from the friend with whom Imoen had grown up.
Were you and she always so? Course!
Imoen exclaimed with more than a little pride.
Our names were synonyms for trouble, as old Flydia would say. But I bet you were the same when you were younger.
Valigar cast back, trying to recall those days of his youth. He had been a trial to his tutors sometimes, especially towards the end, when he would have to be found before he would agree to leave the garden for the library, but his younger life had never involved sneaking out to meet boys, passing coded notes in scriptorium or building chair forts in the library. Of course, he and his parents had had disagreements over the years, but discussions were had and concessions reached, and he had usually found it much less inconvenient for all concerned, himself included, just doing as he was bid. Valigar frowned, thinking on his later years and the matter of magic on which he had not been prepared to concede. He had likely been more trouble for his parents once he had left home, he wondered now, confronted with Imoen's merry tales, if he had not been missing out on something. Beside him, Imoen was still waiting for her recollections of juvenile defiance.
Well, I would sometimes go and beg the cook for treats when I was very young, and later I would hide in the gardens until I was brought inside for my lessons, though I don't believe I gave my parents any real trouble.
Imoen looked predictably disappointed.
Oh, well, it takes all sorts. I bet the sages would have much preferred a couple of children like you running about, or walking sedately.
She glanced to him, lips twitching with her sanctimonious nod.
Running can be dangerous.
Valigar tried and failed to stop his smile from becoming a grin. He had the distinct impression he was being teased.
So was the romantic assignation you planned worth all that trouble?
Imoen laughed.
Not really, seemed young Danilo was more interested in my access to the archives than me, though he was certainly a lot less keen on them when Fritha and I locked him down there with the spiders for the night for his cheek. Ah, Elrond had a fit.
Valigar frowned.
Did not Gorion mind all this trouble you brought him? Oh, Fritha got a fair few scolding from him, but not me, he was her guardian, not mine. And a much easier time he had with her. She still thought boys smelt until she was about 19. No, I was raised by Winthrop, the local innkeep who kept a tavern and some rooms for those who did not want to stay in the main library. It was a small place and quiet with it. The sages would sometimes come in for a couple on an evening, but no one was much for drinking there. You've just paid 1,000 gold to stay in Candlekeep for a 10-day, you're not going to waste a day on a hangover. We sometimes got the soldiers from the barracks in, but if you were caught drunk on duty it was pretty serious. Candlekeep was a serious place.
She glanced to him curiously.
Maybe you would be more like me and Fritha, if you had grown up there. Being like we are, it was an act of rebellion. Perhaps, he smiled, but how was it you came to be under Winthrop's guardianship? I suppose because he was the one who found me. He was coming back from a supply run to Bergost when he came across this small caravan, only a few wagons really. It had been attacked by bandits, something he knew straight away because their bodies were littered about it. Everyone inside was dead, too. There had apparently been some magical explosion, perhaps whatever they had been transporting had been volatile. Winthrop found me unconscious in one of the carts. I was about 5 or so, the sages reckoned. I don't remember that or anything before it. Winthrop brought me back to Candlekeep and they sent news of the raid to Bergost, made inquiries with the local watch, but no one came to collect me. So with one child already at the keep, I guess they couldn't see the harm in another and I stayed there, took lessons with Fritha and helped Winthrop at the inn when she had to do chores for the sages. It's strange to think I could have a family out there somewhere, some aunt or cousin.
She gave a shrug, but it's just one of those things. Valigar didn't know what to say. He had known she had grown up in the Candlekeep, that she had been an orphan, he had just never considered the details of it before.
I am sorry.
But Imoen dismissed his sympathy with a grin.
Nah, don't be. I had Winthrop and Beth and everyone, and Fritha was the same. In the end, I think we enjoyed making up our own parents better than the real thing. I remember my dad was.
She stopped mid-flow, the smile fading on her face.
What's going on?
She asked of no one particular as the carts before them slowed, the girl marching to the edge of that wide road to gaze up the long line of wagons. Valigar frowned, his eyes falling on some sort of checkpoint, a score or so of soldiers, their green cloaks all bearing the same red sun of Tethur, moving down the caravan and taking out people to join the slowly amassing group on the roadside, some struggling, others crying and shouting their objections. Valigar felt a jolt through his stomach to match the blow as a tall man was violently coshed into submission, 4 pairs of soldiers waiting there on the roadside to bind their hands and add each person to the growing chain of captives, the rest of the caravan rumbling slowly onward, their eyes straight ahead and making a point not to notice. The checkpoint was drawing closer, 2 soldiers frog marching a struggling man from between the carts just before them.
Wait, no, I'm not one of them. I'm just a traveler. By order of Her Majesty, Queen Zaranda of Tethur, all children are to come with us. Oi, what is going on here?
Called the stout driver of the wagon at their side, a young soldier closing to answer him.
We're under orders to round up all the ballspawn. Since they bring trouble wherever they go, it has been decided that any within Tethur are to be contained for the safety of the entire populace. Are there any traveling with you?
Valigar instinctively sidled in front of Imoen, hiding her from view as he fixed the driver with a dark glower. The stout man hesitated.
Well,
he didn't get a chance to finish.
Yeah, There's some ballspawn traveling with him,
snapped Imoen, barging past before Valigar could catch her.
You have something to say about that?
The soldier suddenly looked a whole lot less sure of himself.
Well, any of the children are to. What is going on here, Solitaire?
Came a clipped voice behind him, the lad whirling back to his commander, and Imoen's ire redirected instantly to the tall, thick-set man.
I could ask you the same, mate. What are you doing with these people? Our orders are quite clear. All ballspawn are to be detained as per royal decree.
Some of the others had caught up to them by now. The caravan halted around them, the soldiers and their prisoners watching the scene play out from the roadside.
And what is being done with these people once they are taken?
Demanded Jaehaera.
They will be moved to an undisclosed location where they will be under guard for their own safety until this threat has passed. All conveniently in one spot awaiting the next invincible giant.
Snapped Imoen.
Did you see Saradush?
Minsk was frowning deeply.
No, who says this is very wrong? Soldiers should be protecting innocent people and imprisoning evil ones. I think you are very confused. It is not my place to question these decisions, sir. Now, are there any ballspawn in your company?
The young soldier swallowed nervously.
Sir, she said. Young Imoen said nothing.
Growled Minsk. The command gave a curt nod.
I see. Well, move along then. I will not move anywhere.
Shouted Imoen.
Let those people go, you've no right to arrest them. How do you even know they're ballspawn? I think the girl has a point,
rumbled a voice behind them, and Valigar was surprised to see Athik strolling slowly up to them, the rest of his group assembled pointedly at his back.
I was at Saradush and I don't recognize half of those poor bastards. You freely admit to being of the children, confirmed the commander. Soldiers, take this man. I wouldn't suggest that if I were you, lad,
came the dwarf behind him, a warhammer hefted from his belt as around him swords were half drawn and spells readied, a good number of the soldiers leaving the roadside to close in behind their captain. Each group was tensed waiting on the other, the horses and oxen about them stirring fretfully, and perhaps it still all could have been talked out, except...
I am sorry, but all ballspawn are to come with.
The captain's hand did not even make contact with Imoen's shoulder. A blur of green and the man disappeared sideways with a loud curse, everyone whipping back to where Fritha was standing further down the road with Solafane, the apple he had thrown now replaced by a small knife, a subtle indicator of what would next be hurtling through the air should they provoke it, though he definitely seemed the less intimidating of the pair at the moment. Fritha was white, sword drawn and trembling in her hand, the girl so furious she was barely able to form the words as she hurled a finger at the bound line of people next to them.
What is that?
Imoen laughed grimly.
Oh ho, now you've done it.
Their commander still grass-side, the nearest soldier stepped in to answer her approach with the bravery that only callow youth could afford.
As per royal decree, all the children are to be impounded. Impounded?
She shrieked.
We are not animals.
Fritha whirled to the wagons next to her, those seated high above all suddenly looking anywhere but there.
And you would have just let them too, wouldn't you? Dogs. He is right, you aren't worth saving.
She whipped back to the commander who was just staggering to his feet.
Release them now and get out of here, or I will slaughter you to the last.
Athik's group drew their weapons, Imoen letting blue energy crackle between her fingers, Minsk and Jaehaera ready behind her, and Valigar felt a hand close about his katana hilt. A wary glance between the soldiers, Fritha's voice raised to a piercing shriek.
Do you want to die? You came here, and there were none, the children all died in Saradush. I said go.
A nod from their commander, the men taking a moment to gather their belongings and fall into rank, at last turning to march west back along the road. Frithla whirled instantly on the people they had left, some of the others moving to untie them.
And as for you lot, stick together and put up a fight next time. And I cannot make this clearer, leave Tether. Just walk east until you're somewhere else. But Melisande said we should meet her in Amcathran,
ventured one bold soul, a few about him nodding. Frithla scowled.
Yes, well, Melisande has her own plan in this, as much as Yogashura, Queen Zarindra, or any of them. Just leave Tether, the further you are from here, the more chance you'll have to survive.
The group seemed to share a look and slowly gathered into some semblance of order, setting out back east along the roadside, the halted caravan watching them pass. Valigar turned back to the group at their side, Athik watching his brethren move off, and Imoen voiced his question.
You're not going with them? Not me,
the warrior laughed.
I figure you lot are the people to stick with, especially for anyone who's set on seeing an end to this curse.
The half-elf woman next to him sighed, those about him looking equally grim.
Then I fear we will have to part. This is much worse than anything I imagined, and Marta made me promise I'd come back in one piece.
Much nodding from his companions, and Athik smiled as he struck the woman's shoulder.
I understand. Safe journey, you lot. I'll be back in Golden Hog by midsummer, so get the drinks in. What about you, Aruna? You off with them?
The girl shook her head.
No, my place is here.
Athik boomed a laugh, squeezing an arm about her shoulders.
That's my girl. Right, well, can we join with you, then? Yeah, course, join the rabble,
welcomed Imoen cheerfully.
But I hope you're ready for a hike.
And she turned to where Frithla was stood at the roadside, Jahara next to her, as the girl angrily signaled their two knights.
Because I don't think we're going to be with this caravan much longer.
Jahara glanced skyward, the clouds parting on a fading dusk as the storm at last rolled on, the droplets she still felt drumming her hood just run off from the trees, and she tipped back the cowl of wool to shake out her short wavy hair. It seemed Fritha's anger had inspired another sort of tempest, clouds gathering above as they had collected their pay from the caravan master, and Fritha had driven them west through the rains Jahara had promised yesterday at a pace that had soon left the caravan far behind. They had finally left the road now, moving up to the tree line to make camp for the evening. Jahara let her bag drop in the cradle of roots beneath the nearest tree. The storm might have been over, but Fritha's temper was still raging, their two horses watching the scene with dark, serene eyes as their group pitched tents and unpacked the rations that would be the night's meal, Fritha storming about collecting firewood and ranting all the while. Jahara was surprised she hadn't tired herself out yet. It was exhausting just watching her.
Those soldiers, vile wretches. Rounding up those people like cattle. And that caravan. Cowards. They would have just walked by as they were cutting their throats.
Aruna sank down next her pack with a deep sigh.
Why are people so horrible? People are weak,
offered Jahara simply.
People are bastards,
countered Athik's bitter snort.
Here,
laughed Imoen. Minsk stepped back from the small fire pit he had dug, the short spade resting across one broad shoulder.
Who says people are people? In Rashomon, my fang protected many of the towns that bordered the Icelands, and many times did I ride into battle to fight for the people who had once mocked me and my ways. Well, you are a better man than I, Minsk,
said Solifane gravely,
for I would have let them reap their own folly.
Anomen was frowning.
The good must stand as examples to the rest. And we did,
snapped Fritha, hurling the pile of sticks she had gathered into the pit, her fury setting them ablaze in a glance.
To think those of the caravan knew them, spoke to them for 2 days on the road, laughed and shared wine with them, and then they just turned away and let them be taken. Bastards! Now, Fritha,
reasoned Jahara,
I know you are angry in this, but they are merely people. And just what are we? Well, they made their choice, and now they have to live with it. I hope they're attacked by a whole army of bandits, I hope they are murdered to the last man, the road blocked for miles by that line of burning caravans.
The predictable outrage, Jahara did not even bother adding her voice to those crying her name.
Fritha! Fritha, you cannot mean that. Why? It would be their own fault for standing by as half their guards were arrested.
A silence, no one seeming to want to provoke her further with a response, when.
Though I wonder at your words, I think it commendable that your being reacts with such fierceness in the face of these atrocities,
said Brianna succinctly. Another pause. A thick sighed as he heaved himself up and set to unpacking his cooking pot and a collection of spoons.
Well, this meal isn't going to make itself. I should go and make my prayers,
said Brianna as she made to stand as well. Fritha seized up the old iron pot.
I'm going to get some water.
And Jahara watched her stalk from the clearing. With any luck, she would return in a better mood and no words of censure would need to be expressed. The druid had more patience for her outrage than she could normally have mustered, but she knew such anger would only do more harm if allowed to fester over long. Jahara let her gaze linger on the fire's steady flicker, the flames licking about the pit that was already half ash from the inferno that had initially engulfed it. Irritation prickled at such waste, but it faded quickly. It was hard not to feel sympathy for the girl. It had all begun again too soon, Fritha just beginning to get herself back when she had been forced to leave Suldanesseller once more. She was not yet far enough from the broken young woman who had died to save that leafy city, and Jahara saw it at moments like this and back at the caravan, the facade of cool leadership lost to reveal the angry thirst that in reality drove her onward, just as she had been as she had led them through the underdark. The druid could almost see the shadow of that woman next to her, Vuldrin whispering at the girl's ear, and Jahara wondered suddenly if Fritha still heard the voice. It seemed the supreme expression of distrust to ask her. Well, it was done now, and that they were on the road once more did not mean the girl would not have chance to heal. It was a long way to Amkithran and such journeys could be ones of the soul as well as the feet, as long as they managed to avoid any more scenes like today's. Across from her, Brianna was looking over her map, their heads in close as a gnomon peered over her shoulder and Jahara smiled to herself, she had no need for maps in these lands. They would be in Marmont by dusk tomorrow, a large sprawling town kept rich by its proximity to the main road, river, and the capital, Dar Omar, and the place was well known for its craftsmen, especially the finely carved furniture for which that land was famed. That harpers were not welcome in Tether was true enough, but that did not mean they did not operate there, and she had visited the town a few times for their cause, its location making it a useful place for other things, as well, the often illegal excesses of Kalim Shan making their way through its gates on their journey north. Fritha had once told her to renew her ties with her brothers, perhaps this could be the chance. Fritha had been a long while in collecting their water, and she was wise to do so, the girl returning in a temper much cooled by this absence. Minsk understood such rages, it took time to calm again the soul again once its ire had been stirred, and he sent her a smile upon her return, the girl returning it sheepishly as she set the water above the fire and preparations could at last be made for their meal. The stew was bubbling fiercely now, A large flat bread warming on the stone they had set amid the embers, and the yeasty scent reminded him of home, sharing the heavy doughy bread and spiced ale with his fang on those cold nights patrolling the tundra. He let the memory of it warm him, a much-needed comfort after the disquiet of the day. He usually found such matters simple. But this whole conflict was not so easily split into those men of righteousness and those of tyranny. What those soldiers had been doing was wrong, but they were following the orders of their queen, trying to protect the common people of that land from the war that was to come. And the people of the caravan should have raised up their voices in protest at such wrongs, but Minsk knew it was the nature of people to avoid such conflicts with authority, and the ashamed way they had turned from the scene had shown him where their hearts had lain in this, too weak though they were to act upon them. And where was his heart? Minsk knew his answer there. It had lain with Fritha's own, everything to his satisfaction in the end, as the godchildren were freed and soldiers sent away unharmed, though he would not have seen her so wrathful for it. At least she was calm now, seated a few places along from him between Solifane and Imoen, the dark elf's hand resting on the small of her back as they sat side by side as brother and sister. Minsk approved, all warriors should aid each other as they may. Across the camp, a no-man seemed to have found in himself a great need to clean his kit, the man scrubbing vigorously the inside of his cuirass, Valigar at his side, though such work did not hold him, the man's dark eyes lingering on the girls opposite, and Minsk recalled their talk the previous night. It was a sad thing, when brothers clashed with words, but Imoen had been hurt by his lack of care and he would not have it happen a second time.
"Here, shall we have a bit of wine, while we're waiting on that stew?"
offered Athik to those about him, the man already rooting through his pack to dig out a fat stone bottle, from which he poured a good cupful of dark red wine before passing it on to the woman at his side, Brianna receiving it with a nod.
"I carted this all the way from Riathaven. Don't know why we never got round to drinking it, I suppose there was always something better on offer."
He gasped, choking over that first sour sip.
"By, that will cure you or kill you." "So, you only recently came to Tethur?"
questioned Jahara, receiving the wine to fill both his and her own cup, Minsk nodding his thanks as Athik made his answer.
"Well, Aruna here's from Loudwater, aren't you, Flower?" "Yes, my mother is the innkeeper of the Crossed Swords. When we met I was helping her there as I've always done, whilst studying magic under an old mage who has a shop in the town." Athik, Golland, and Vigo were guests at the inn, called to the town by a merchant who wanted to investigate what had happened to his caravan. They needed someone who knew the area, so I put them in contact with Hantha, a ranger who lived on the edge of the high forest, and when they learned I was a mage, they asked me to come too. "I,"
nodded Athik.
"I'd worked with sorcerers on a few caravans, and they always come in useful. Plus, with her mam owning the inn, it meant we could get our rooms for free."
Aruna laughed and batted his arm.
"Athik. As for the merchant's caravan, it seemed to have fallen to a barbarian raiding party, and the local militia were considering retribution, but a bit of investigation uncovered this was all set up by a rival merchant. The trouble he had caused, I think they hung him in the end. After that, it seemed only right we stay together. We traveled around the area, helping local militias subdue the orcs and other raiders, or guarding caravans. My mother was so worried for me, at first, but she could see how quickly my magic was developing and she knew it was the right choice."
A frown marred her young face.
"I kept in touch while we were about the northern lands. We often returned to Loudwater between excursions anyway, but since coming south, well, I have only been able to send a few letters. But she understands this is what I must do, and she accepts it." "Must be hard still having family with all this going on,"
sympathized Imoen. "I never felt lucky being an orphan before."
"What about you, Athik?" continued Fritha. "You said you grew up in Neverwinter." "I, in a small orphanage on the edge of the docks run by the Helmites. The woman that ran the place, Sister Isolde, was a bit of a harridan, but she did all right by us. trying to get us apprenticed as early as she could, and get us learning a trade. She could see I'd be a handful and arranged with some lads over at the local watch station to drill me with bow and blade.
He laughed.
Channel that disruptive energy into something that would be useful later on, and it was. I joined up with a small band of mercs when I was just 17 and left that city soon as I was able.
So young, came Brianna.
Was the orphanage so terrible? Nah, but I didn't care one bit for Neverwinter, with its bridges and towers and temples, so grand as to draw your eye away from beggars and barefoot children and everyone else the watch just herded into the docks district and left there to rot, and all of it under the great fat thumb of that self-proclaimed Lord, Gnome Botherer Nashor.
He sent the girls a meaningful nod.
They say he favors the small folk.
Really, sighed Jahara, over the girls' laughter.
All towns have such troubles, Lord Nashor surely cannot be held responsible for them all.
Yeah, conceded Ithik,
but I find when he looks after Neverwinter, he tends to mostly be looking after himself, and everyone else can go whistle. You did not see the trouble Sister Isolde would have trying to get coin for books and clothes for growing children, for the church could only give her so much. I didn't have a pair of shoes on my feet till I was 12. Every day there were fresh bodies to be pulled from the harbor, the watch doing little more than arranging for their burial. What more could they do? The thieves outnumbered them 10 to 1, and half of them were on the take anyway, their wages cut to a pittance to pay for the rebuilding of the city walls, and there was Nashor throwing this banquet and entertaining that Waterhavian delegation.
A gnomon was frowning.
The man may have his faults, but he earned his position there and I believe that, at least, deserves some respect. Well, where I'm from, respect's to be earned, not dished out like yestereve's leftovers.
Ithik, muttered Erina, a hand upon his arm. The man patted her knee, his manner warmer as he conceded.
Don't get me wrong, there are worse places to grow up, but everyone sees Luskan and all its vices, and Neverwinter seems some shining flower of virtue by comparison. Well, I'll tell you, I've been to Luskan and I've been to Neverwinter, and at least the former knows it's rotten to the core. Neverwinter is like a high-class whore, all fur cloak and no knickers.
Imoen spat the wine she had just drawn back into her cup, Fritha hiding her face in Solophane's shoulder as the girls laughed, the elf looking more amused by their delight than anything said. Jahara decided to turn the conversation back to more sensible matters.
So you traveled mostly about the savage frontier? As Erina said, for a good 3 or so years. We made names for ourselves about there, much like you lot did, I suppose. Well, maybe not, we didn't stop a war. You heard about that, did you?
Laughed Imoen, looking rather pleased. Erina nodded.
One of the caravan drivers recognized your names from when he was in the gate last summer, when you were being hailed as heroes. Pretty impressive stuff,
agreed Ithik. Fritha offered him a mild shrug.
Perhaps, but your band could have likely done the same. Maybe the only reason you didn't stop a war, was because there wasn't one to stop. Young Fritha is right,
nodded Minsk.
It is not the evil you battle, but that you took up the arms to do so that is important. Well put, my friend.
Laughed Ithik.
Now, shall we see how this stew is getting on?
It was ready and eaten with relish after that day of rain and walking, the forest about them stirring with the familiar sounds of the night creatures as the twilight deepened about them. Imoen leaned comfortably into the girl next to her, empty cup lolling in her hand. Solophane, Brianna, and Jahara had all disappeared off to make their prayers, Erina busying herself over her spell book, while the men played a few hands of hearts. Fritha's gaze was on them, or one of them anyway, her eyes following Inomen as he leaned forward to collect the cards for that round.
So, he's come back to you, then,
offered Imoen quietly.
Well, he's back,
Fritha conceded,
I think the reason might still be open to dispute.
Imoen snorted. For someone who had earned enough praise within Candlekeep's walls, her friend could be surprisingly dense.
It's clearly because of you, Fritha. He says not.
Imoen was astounded.
Really? Yes, swore it was all for the cause of righteousness, had nothing to do with me.
Imoen glanced back to him, just resisting the urge to march over there, give him a kick, and ask him what in the hells he was playing it.
And how do you feel about that?
The girl just shrugged.
Not much, especially for the fact he was lying through his teeth. But I think that he did is a good sign.
Fritha continued musingly over her laughter.
I mean, if he had come back with vocal declarations of love undying, then I would have had no hope. The man has a stubborn streak that makes me look positively reasonable. But this way. He knows our past always going to be between us, but if he's willing to lie about it, then perhaps he's realized that trying to rekindle what was there isn't going to be the best for him in the long run.
The girl smiled, her gaze falling pointedly on the dark-haired woman who had just arrived back at their camp.
And I'm sure once that idea has settled, it will only be a matter of time before he decides his affections lie elsewhere, and that will all tie up nicely.
Fritha glanced to her.
I don't suppose you want to play matchmaker, do you? Help things along.
Imoen dropped her attention to her bootlaces and firmly shook her head.
Nah, I've had enough of romance lately to last me a lifetime, or at least the next 10 days,
she added with a laugh. After all, melancholy really didn't suit her. Fritha was unconvinced.
You really liked him, didn't you? Yeah,
Imoen admitted in heavy confession, the dull hurt of it ignored but never quite forgotten.
But I should have known it would come to nothing. I'm a sorceress in about 7 years, his junior, and a load of other reasons I just wouldn't have even considered.
Imoen scowled at the scuffed toes of her worn leather boots. Gods, when had she become so caught by the thing? She had been telling herself she wasn't all that bothered about him for days now, longer than some her sweethearts had lasted, so when was it going to become the truth? Imoen sighed, resigned to feeling bad for at least a few more days. It was time to change the subject. She sent a nod to the knight opposite.
So, it's really all over between you two?
Fritha frowned.
What happened to you having had enough of romance? Yeah, for me,
Imoen laughed.
And I'll take the fact you're avoiding the question as a no.
She had expected indignant protests, but Fritha just sighed.
Imoen, it's not a yes or no answer. He is a no-man. He was in love with me before I even realized it. He pursued me for almost a month, and we were only together about the same length of time before I had lost my soul and decided I hated his guts. I'm not sure either of us should want to go back there again.
The girl sank her head into her hands.
I don't think I could take the stress for one. Ah, has this morning's outburst finally caught up with you?
Came a voice above them, Jahara returning from her prayers to drop neatly next to her and pass the girl a twisted dried root that Imoen recognized as one of the druid's headache cures.
So, did you ask Sylvanus to give us better weather tomorrow?
Asked Imoen eagerly. The woman sent her a stern frown.
You will be surprised to hear I did not bother my lord with such trifles. Truly? I'm always on it mask for stuff.
Imoen clapped her hands together, eyes screwed shut in earnest petition.
Please, 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 please can you get rid of this pimple on my chin by tomorrow? It looks like I'm growing another head.
Fritha was laughing, though Jahara looked distinctly less amused.
We will be in the town of Marmont tomorrow. If the blemish is still there, you can go to the shrine to Soon and ask the same. I imagine she will be more inclined to hear you. Shrine to Soon, do you know Marmont, then?
asked Imoen. Jaehaera shrugged.
I passed through there with Khalid on a few occasions. Any good taverns?
Questioned Fritha, absently dunking the root in her wine.
I was not in a position to see. Ah, never left your room, eh?
Nodded Imoen, sending her a wink.
I got you.
Jaehaera gave a burst of laughter loud enough to startle the whole camp.
You two will be the end of me.
Solafane ducked into the tent, his eyes taking pleasure in the sudden darkness. Fritha was already laid under her blankets and likely dozing by the steady sigh of her breathing, the girl starting awake as he threw off his tunic and lay down beside her.
I am sorry. It's all right,
she murmured.
For one awful moment, I thought it was time for our watch. When did Jaehaera say we are on? The watch after next. Minsk will wake us.
Fritha sighed and turned to lie on her back, kicking the blankets from her feet.
I much preferred it when no one trusted us to take one,
she grumbled quietly. Solafane smiled, feeling again that warm acceptance her friends had shown him from the very start.
I do not know, there are other benefits to traveling with this group. I am glad you feel at ease with them,
she snorted tiredly.
One of us should.
He watched her gaze up into the tent's peaked darkness.
They won't say anything, but my anger worries them. I was surprised myself today,
he admitted.
I thought you resigned to the nature of people.
He felt her shrug.
I thought I was. But today, they weren't just strangers. They knew those people, outnumbered those soldiers 10 men to 1, and yet they still turned away and let those ballspawn be taken. Maybe if one driver or hand had said something, anything, I wouldn't have felt so cheated, but they carried on walking. These are the people I could end up dying for.
She sighed again and shook her head.
I never meant anything more than when I threatened to kill those soldiers. I can see it upsets the others, that they think I am perhaps falling back to someone I should have banished when my soul was returned.
She glanced to him, eyes bright in the gloom.
Does it worry you, too?
His answer was firm enough to assuage even her dark fears.
No. Your anger was justified and necessary. Illustrate teaches us that we must accept the faults of others, but repay any violence in swift kind, lest more are harmed by such faltering. If they had forced your hand today, I would have fought by your side without hesitation or doubt.
She was smiling, her face wearing the soft look she would sometimes get, as though her heart was wavering between joy and sorrow.
I'm glad you are here, Solafane. And I'm really glad you were here this morning.
She added with a giggle,
I can't throw for toffee. That apple would have missed the captain by a clear yard, thunked off Imoen's head, then Minsk would have nut the commander, and there would have been a brawl erupted before we had even arrived.
Solafane laughed.
I am pleased, then, my skills are at last being employed for something worthy. Do you mean that?
She pressed quietly.
I worry sometimes that this is not how you envisaged your life when you agreed to come with us. It is not, but only as far as I could not have imagined what to expect. I was talking to Aruna earlier. You know there are settlements of Drow who worship Illustrae within the high forest, perhaps you could find a place among them.
It made him sadder than she could know to hear her make these plans for a future she might not see.
Perhaps. Well,
she sighed, turning over to nestle down among the blankets,
it is something to bear in mind. Good night, Solafane. Good night, Fritha.
Their pace was much faster without the caravan, another morning's walking finding her at Valigar's side, Imoen laughing as he had shared with her the story of the time early on in his life outside the city, his hunting perch in the low boughs of a tree above a wild pig run somewhat compromised when a nesting jay had taken exception to his presence. He still had the scar on arm where the fall had broken it. It was nice hearing about his past. It seemed to close the gap in their ages, helping to banish that air of the disapproving older brother, though it was likely a manner she encouraged in him, with her many tales of mischief and misbehavior from her old home.
Ulront often said he rued the day I walked through the gates. Was there never any talk of sending you both to an orphanage? No, and I never even considered they would at the time.
Imoen sent him a cheeky grin.
Why on Toriel would they have wanted to? I suppose now it will have been because they couldn't trust Fritha would be safe in the outside world, and perhaps me too.
She added thoughtfully,
I was never sure whether they knew of my heritage too, or just suspected, or maybe they didn't know at all, and just kept me about 'cause they could.
Valigar frowned.
Did you not miss the company of other children? Not really. You can't miss what you've never had, and me and Fritha had enough in each other. Together we built our own secret world, away from the rules and the silence of the library. We knew we both orphans and we while away the hours when we were younger talking about who our amazing parents had been. My dad was a Kalimshite pirate and my mum was a Pasha's concubine he had whisked away. Yeah, I know it sounds like the plot of something airy I'd be reading.
She laughed at his look.
But it was great when we were younger. I can't think what Fritha's mum had been, but her dad was a purple dragon knight. Here, Fritha.
She called to where her friend was walking with Solafane just before them, the girl pausing to turn back at her hail.
Fritha, who was your mum again? You know she was a lady from Ashabenford, why ask me this?
The girl snapped with a lot more heat. Imoen felt the question had warranted.
Calm down, I didn't mean your real one. The one we used to pretend about, you know, when we made up our parents.
Fritha was scarlet, eyes seeming to avoid the man next to her as she mumbled,
she was a temple dancer at the elven city of Evereska. That was it.
Imoen cried,
a dancer to Angharad.
Fritha said nothing, returning to their path as Jahara halted at their head.
Well, we can stop now for something to eat, I think.
Fritha turned instantly to the forest.
I'm going to refill my flask.
Jahara was already on the roadside and stooped over her bag as she rummaged.
Well, wait, Fritha, and you can take everyone's. She's gone, Jahara,
said Imoen reluctantly. Solafane cut off her anger with his offer, hand held out for the druid's flask.
Here, I will take the others to her.
He could hear the river's chatter after only a few paces from the tree line, his passage through the undergrowth almost noiseless, and he came upon her soon afterwards, her back to him as she seemed to watch that rush of water, a silver leviathan between two banks lush with reeds.
Fritha.
She glanced back and quickly turned away again, but it was enough to see the mottled wetness to her face, her voice falsely bright as she gestured to the ground at her feet.
Oh, hello, Solafane, you brought the others' flasks, thanks. Leave them there, and I'll fill them and bring them back in a moment.
He closed to her side, a hand hovering over her arm.
Fritha, are you? I'm fine,
she cut in with a smile, wiping a sleeve across her cheeks and finally facing him,
just being silly. It just catches up with me sometimes, how different this life is from the one I used to dream about in Candlekeep. I'm not complaining.
She added quickly, as though she thought her sorrow overindulgent,
it's just it can just catch me off guard sometimes.
Solafane sent her an understanding smile.
Then you are right to weep. You must let your soul grieve its loss, for only then will it be able to come to terms with it.
He reached into his pocket to remove the small square of folded linen, the handkerchief she had long ago given him for his brow on some hot day back in Suldanesseller and had remained with him unused since. He placed it neatly in her hand, his lips twitching.
"There, weep as you will."
Fritha burst into wet laughter.
"You swine! I was having a lovely time feeling all sorry for myself, and now you've gone and spoiled it."
The drow could feel the smile warm all the way to his stomach.
"Well, I am sorry to hear that. Come on," she sighed, stooping for her flask and taking a step towards the river. "Let's get these, oh gods!"
She started back with a cry, Cellophane darting up to meet her, and they both leaned forward together. And there among the reeds it stared up at them, a bloated, hollow-eyed face. A no-man gazed down at the three bodies before him, grey and swollen with water, skin hanging from wounds in fleshy ribbons, or pocked here and there to a fine lace by the nibbling of fish, revealing the dull pink musculature beneath. Fritha and Cellophane had burst from the trees but a quarter-hour ago, the girl white and announcing gravely that they had found something. And indeed they had, a quick search uncovering two more bodies on the opposite bank, the three hauled out and laid now on their side of the river, two bearing the wounds that indicated a fierce battle, the last with his throat cut. Jahara knelt over them as she made her examination. A no-man did not know how she could bear to be so close, the smell.
"Well, they have likely been dead about 2 days considering their condition. Who wonders could it have been bandits?"
The druid looked grim, lifting the arm of the nearest body over to show them the ligature marks at his wrists.
"Then he was still bound when they dispatched him,"
confirmed Brianna.
"More than likely, and untied afterwards when they made to dump the body."
The knight shook her head.
"That was no way for this man to die." "It's no way for anyone to die, cowardly dogs!"
spat Athik angrily, Arana's olive skin almost a match for those beneath her as she stared down at the grey body.
I recognize him." "What now?" "He was in the hall with us back in Saradush, he was one of the children." "And the other two?"
pressed Jahara.
"Maybe the woman, I'm not sure." "It was those soldiers, wasn't it?"
said Imoen, her voice strangely even.
"It would look that way at the moment,"
sighed the druid, dusting off her knees as she rose once more. Arana looked tearful.
"Oh, why would they do this?" "They clearly resisted,"
offered Valigar.
"Perhaps they decided they had to be subdued in another way." "More children dead!"
burst out Athik.
"This Dem army is going to do the Five's job for them."
Fritha said nothing. After the rage of yesterday her silence was all the more worrying, a no-man watching her stare blankly at the bodies.
"Are we going to bury them?"
asked Arana quietly. Jahara shook her head.
"I fear the ground here will be too thin and we have not the time, though this place is not such a bad one to take your final rest. Come, we should get back to the road."
And so they sat there and finished the meal they had been halfway through. No one seemed to have much of an appetite, but they ate anyway, silent save for the requests for tea or the dark vinegar that dressed their bread. Fritha finished first, the girl rising to walk a short way out into plains, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains she had once walked through on her search for Yogeshwara's temple. A no-man took a long draught of water from his flask and slowly rose as well. She did not turn at his approach, eyes still fixed upon the sky.
"Fritha! It's all happening too fast. There are too many players in this now, too much is outside of my control."
A no-man felt his stomach drop at the despair that edged her words.
"Fritha, we can only do what is within our influence, just walk our own path and trust in the fates to deal with the rest. But then, when we reach the end, then what? It may be too late. Too late for what?
He pressed, but she just shook her head.
Anomen. Fritha.
They turned as one to find Imoen waving to them, those behind her packing up.
Come,
said Fritha, voice steady once more.
We need to reach Marmont before nightfall.
End of chapter.